In the year 2026, absolutely nobody genuinely cares about the state of Iowa. I can't name a single person outside the state that genuinely knows what's going on there. Despite that, every 4 years, Iowa becomes the most important state in the union, and politicians rush there to talk to voters. But why? Why do politicians care for Iowa only once every 4 years? Well, the United States is a rare example of a democracy. In most democracies, every political party has a leader that will remain so unless they die, resign, or have a successful cabinet overthrow, which here in Canada at least is impossible. But, anyways, the United States does not do that. Despite what it may feel like, the Republicans and Democrats do not have an official party leader. What this means is that to determine a political party's candidate for president, the political parties hold a national committee where party members, or sometimes anybody, it depends on the state, vote in primaries or sometimes caucuses, it depends on the state, in every state and territory and the District of Columbia, and just for the Democrats, registered party members who live abroad. This gives enormous power to voters to choose their politicians. I know that's a mouthful and really complicated, but that doesn't really matter. All you need to know is that these primaries are really important to the political parties. However, by the time that Montana votes, everybody knows who the nominee will be. Keep this in mind for later. This wasn't always the case though. Abraham Lincoln wasn't elected in a primary, but by the party elites. This was just the case for the vast majority of American history. It just didn't make financial sense to hold a Republican primary in South Carolina, and it didn't make sense to hold a Republican primary in only Republican states because that would break the conventions of the time. The very first full and open, proper, modern primary in American history wasn't held until 1972. And that was only due to the unconventional nature of the Democratic 1968 primary. Following that, the Republicans decided to change their system as well. However, it wasn't for a couple of elections later for every state to have a primary for everyone. All of this to say, primaries are fairly recent in presidential history, and every single state in the Union and their constitutions is older than the primary system. This means it would be fairly easy to manipulate the system to get more attention. The state of New Hampshire, not Iowa, decided to write into their constitution to be the very first primary to be held. But Iowa was smarter. They wrote into their constitution that they're going to be the very first anything, primary or caucus, to be held. And since they were more specific, Iowa goes first as a caucus, and New Hampshire would go second as a primary, technically speaking, being the first primary to be held. Think back to what I said earlier. By the time that Montana votes, everybody knows who the nominee will be. This is completely true. Iowa, being first, usually sets the ball in motion for a presidential campaign. Do well in Iowa, become the nominee. Do poorly in Iowa, unless you're George H.W. Bush, say goodbye to the presidency. This leads to politicians on both sides visiting Iowa in droves to be the one with the best chance of winning from early on. This means that political candidates meet with voters from all across the state and listen to their complaints. Hillary Clinton admitted she hadn't known about the worst effects of the opioid crisis until she visited New Hampshire for their primaries in 2016, despite Kentucky having dealt with the worst effects of it for decades. This gives enormous power into the hands of Iowa, who can single-handedly make or break a presidential campaign and set the ball rolling for what the candidates will end up looking like and even how their policies will be shaped by November. That's why Iowa acts as a litmus test of sorts. The Iowa caucus holds enormous influence over both parties' conventions, and 6-7% of the time voting for the right candidate gives you enormous credibility in the future. Stick around for next time, where I go over why people wholeheartedly believe the US Civil War started in Kansas rather than officially what's told that it started in South Carolina.